Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello and welcome to The People's View. This is your host, Representative Carl Seidel, and we're sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee. We want to welcome tonight's guest as the Alderman from Ward 9, Dan Moriarty. Dan, welcome aboard, and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for Alderman and what your objectives are now that you are an Alderman.
Well, thanks for having me first. I'm from Kansas, but I live in Nashua. This is my home, and I really like it. It suits me. The reason I ran for Alderman and the reason I'll continue to have interest in doing the job and hopefully run again in the future, it sort of changes as time goes on, and people have been asking me that question a lot, and I answer it differently as I learn more about the job. Originally, I became interested in participating. Because of the contrast of living in Massachusetts for many years and then moving to New Hampshire, much smaller population, and the town that I was living in, it was an election year, 2004 when I moved up here in New Hampshire. It's a big election year. And it seemed like everybody was a state rep. I mean, there's 400 state reps. So there's 7 people running for 5 spots. I thought to myself, how hard can it be? I've got to give this a try, see what it's like. But more so than that, I had read a little bit about the history of New Hampshire from this book written in 1864. The fact that you could have a history book written that long ago says a lot. But there's a long history of self-governance in New Hampshire and people being involved and a small population self-responsibility, I think. So I thought, okay, let's try this out. Unfortunately, I have a day job. I have to work for a living, and being a state rep takes a lot of time during the day in particular. Tuesday to Thursday mostly, 10 to 2 mostly. If you want to do a good job, a lot more time. So I sort of decided to give that up for a while until I could figure something else out. Until a very close friend of mine suggested that I run for Alderman. And it seemed to make sense. It's a short commute. The meetings are in the evening, and it's in my neighborhood. So I gave it a try, and the more time I spent doing it, the more I realized that it really does suit me. I find I like people. I've always liked people. I like working with people, and I like spending time talking with them.
So you found that this job as the Alderman for the city of Nashua is complex but still interesting, and you've picked up on it, I notice, on a number of different committees that you're on. Tell us a little bit about the budget process in Nashua and how you're involved in that.
So this is my first year, my first term, and I've only been an Alderman for 6 months now. I'm not on the Budget Review Committee, so I've spent my time reviewing the budget, watching Channel 16, believe it or not, and of course talking to the other aldermen, and I have a copy of the budget myself. So I've put a lot, possibly more time than your average citizen studying it. Not as much time as the people that are on the committee itself. Part of the reason why I'm not on the committee is you basically you select several committees and you're chosen. Same thing. The board president.
Same thing in the state too.
Sure.
I didn't get my first selection.
Sure. I actually did get my first selection.
You did.
But that was Human Affairs actually. But that's a committee, of course. Everything and I'm learning how the process works. Everything comes to the full board first for first reading, then gets sent out to committee, and then the committee attends to the matters at hand.
A lot of the detail part
does the execution of the project and the discussion, and then refers it back in with some advice to the full board. So I'm obligated to understand it in order to vote on it.
Sure. And what's coming up in the budget? I noticed there is some Well, in the papers, they said something about cutting a little bit more out of the budget now that's at full committee.
It finally, the budget has gone on a little bit longer than this year from what I've heard of the past several years. It has been pared down somewhat. But if you don't mind, I could give a brief overview to the audience who may not be, it might be helpful to frame the discussion. First of all, the total budget is $245 million. So it's, a $250 million. I'm not sure what the state budget is. State budget is
around $10 billion.
About $10 billion. Interestingly enough, if you take $245 million and divide it by 15 aldermen, and you take the $10 billion and divide it by 420 state reps, it's similar to this. There's a little bit more dollars per representative at the state level than in the city, but anyway, it's a smaller budget, but there's a smaller group of people. So anyway, and really some of that budget, there's something called well, if you subtract out the debt service and insurance, then there's the amount that's the discretionary funds is around $209 million. So if you, in the big picture, it's as an engineer, let me back up a little bit. I try to summarize things and find out what's the most impactful aspect of it. And I'll get to the punchline in a second, which is something that I read in the newspaper this morning, a final review, that many people reading the numbers might not have realized the significance or insignificance of this.
Of some of them, I agree.
Of this, yeah.
Same thing at the state.
Yeah. So about half the budget is the school budget, actually 55%. But if you think of the pie chart of the total city budget, about half of it, 55% is school. And then of another 25% includes the next three largest departments, which is police, fire, and public works. So that really gives you an idea of how much of the budget is school budget, which is a large number. And then of the remaining 25% of the budget, half of that is debt service. So there's a very small amount of the budget that is actually everything else, which would be capital improvements, the cemeteries, libraries, public health, welfare, all that stuff is all a very small amount. So of that $209 million, 82% of it is salaries. So really that there's not a lot of room within the budget to reduce or grow, although you only have 18% of the budget that you can actually adjust.
Well, yeah, but you're going, even when you talk about salaries being such a large percentage, and it's almost the same number with the state, you got to talk about the benefit part of it, which is something which is negotiated, and that, I assume you're running into the same problem that we have at the state level, that the funding or the financing of those projected benefits is really hard to handle. Hard to guarantee. How do you do that on the local level?
That's true. That is the 82% that I mentioned includes the benefits and pension. And one thing that I can give a specific example is with reference to the the fireman union's budget, the fireman's union contract. I sat down and spent 3 hours with a fireman from my ward at his invitation last fall, or excuse me, this seems like last fall. It was this past late winter, and went through it page by page, and read every line, and I did my best to look at what was their pay structure for someone of equivalent age and experience as me, generally lower than the commercial world. Then I would look at the benefits of how many vacation time, equal to or greater than what I'm getting, and then sick time, which is they have as much sick time as they have. So all the different things that you add up, and trying to get an idea, get a sense of fairness, and then, or at least just get a baseline. As an alderman, I don't negotiate the budget. That's left to the commissioners, fire commissioners. But we vote on it. We can make recommendations, or we can make changes if we wanted to. But I wanted to get a sense of what is the baseline, and then I wanted to know within the negotiations, what did they give up and what did they get? And one of the things that is becoming an issue with regards to benefits is health care. For everybody, health care is becoming an issue. And the mayor was working very hard, put a lot of energy in pushing hard on all the unions fairly across the board to have them pay a larger share of their health benefits. And so they took that. They accepted that. There was some issue with whether it went back to September of last year or October of last year, the retroactive amount that they had to pay, increased share of their benefits.
Is that due to when the contract ended before? Or
it was a combination of when the contract ended, when she started negotiating with other unions, and when there were a lot of other unions. There was a large block of other unions that negotiated quickly, and that was September, and then
so
a few.
So they set the I guess the standard
at September 1st, and then several other unions continued to work, but they gave up a few things, and then they received a few things. But even more, one of the things that I've continued having dialogue with the Firemen's Union about this, and the sick time and vacation time, you can save it up. It accumulates to quite a large amount, and you can save it to your last year. So you
Which
retire.
affects your pension.
Affects your pension,
right.
yes. And there's a term called spiking,
right.
which generally it talks more. Spiking, I think, really means when you have somebody who spends the final 3 years putting in a lot of overtime, and they spike up their salary, and they can carry that up. Well, already they've recognized that that is an issue of keeping the pensions affordable for the long term, and the people that are coming in, the new hires, don't have the same benefit of that effect as the people that are, so the people that are grandfathered in, so they're starting to phase it in. So it's a give and take, but it seems to be surprisingly free of animosity at the moment, this negotiation.
So you're coming to some change in that. They can't accumulate indefinite amount.
Right, I don't remember the specifics of that one, but they certainly cannot accumulate a indefinite amount, and even if they accumulate it and get the check when they retire,
it doesn't affect.
It does not affect the final calculation.
Yeah, because I know there was some state legislation on spiking, and I didn't know how it affected your negotiations or anything like that. I think it becomes effective. Well, I think it was probably July 1st, at least for the state workers on spiking.
Okay, and again, trying to get a sense of fairness, or some sort of, at least a perspective of where the different contracts and their salary structure and benefits. I always compare to what do I have, what do I get, what I used to have. And where I work, the pensions have been phasing out for several years.
Type, yeah.
Now they're switching from a fixed benefit to a fixed contribution. Right, exactly. Yeah. You know the terminology.
Oh, well, I've gone through that. I've had a company where we started out that way. We started up a new company in Texas about 15 years ago. Yeah. And that's the only way to start for a new company nowadays, really. I don't know if you've had any experience. BAE, I had retired from DuPont, so it was the same kind of big company. And they were starting to phase out. They had us contribute to 401k before they really changed the defined benefit contribution. So
yeah, and so it's been, as people have been hiring in, as time has gone on, the amount they match on 401k has gone up, and the amount of pensions going down. So this year, 2012, is, for all intents and purposes, the last year of a pension. At BAE.
Really?
It's effectively
I
ended.
imagine that's the same way at DuPont by now. I mean, it's been, gee, it's probably been 15 years since I retired. Yeah. And I didn't realize that. But I retired a little bit early to go down. I went down to Texas for a new job. That was kind of interesting, but that's another story. So you feel that the negotiation with the unions and everything has gone well? And
with each of the unions different. I just know that specifically I spent more time with the fire department, partly because there's so many firemen in Ward 9. Several of the
Are there?
The
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Actually, they joke about, they call Fireman's Hill. This is the hill that we live on.
They all get around.
Yeah, there's quite a few, for whatever reason.
I hope when you campaign, you keep them on your side.
I try. I try.
Do you have any interaction with the school budget unions, or is that completely left separate?
Again, that one, I haven't spent much time with that. That was negotiated before I came in.
I see.
There are a lot of them,
the
unions.
third,
There's the
yeah.
paraprofessionals recently got it approved. But again, the Board of Education, they take care of that.
Mm-hmm.
But so the last thing, getting way back to sort of my discussion of like half the budget school,
mm-hmm.
and a quarter of it's police, fire, and then public works, and then debt service and everything else. So of the $250 million budget, this morning in the newspaper, if you read through it, you would find that it said, okay, the Budget Review Committee has completed their work, and they're going to send it to the Board of Aldermen, and they've pared down the budget $245,000.
Mm-hmm.
So they've taken a $245 million budget and reduced it by $245,000.
0.1%.
0.1%, yeah, and which is amazing because I watched there were several people, a lot of people spent a lot of time scrutinizing that budget line by line. I mean, it's 250 pages, line by every single line of this budget came through, and each of the department heads came through. And I spent hours and hours watching this on TiVo, on Channel 16, reviewing, re-listening to what certain people said, trying to figure out. Every now and then a conversation would come up about protocol. But in the big picture, one thing that impressed me, which it impressed me also when I met Chief Morrissey back in September, I think it was, or October. I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello. I was impressed with how thoroughly he understood his budget. He didn't have a piece of paper in front of him like I do and just knew everything off the top of his head as we were talking. And the same thing with our superintendent, Conrad, just a high level of understanding of how the inner workings of the school, and same with our new police chief, Susing. They really, really, really know their material well, and that gives me a sense of confidence that even if we may not agree with how things should be laid out, or I think it should be this more than that, when push comes to shove, I'm confident in deferring to them.
They know the detail a lot greater. Well, the process, not only here in the city, but the county and the state is more or less the same way. There's several times it's reviewed, so the people in charge ought to know it almost by heart, without looking at pages. But I agree, you've got a lot of pages there to try to understand.
There are, and I took some notes, and there are a few things of, various issues that came up. One of the biggest ones that came up, the most impactful. So, that the Budget Review Committee ultimately eliminated recommended that we eliminate $245,000 out of the budget. Meant that for the most part, after all those discussions, everybody came to agreement. But what could you significantly change? And one topic that came up and made the paper a couple times, and it still may continue, has to do with the crime at the moment, with regards to the police budget and how many staff.
Right.
And I learned that they have they are approved to have 177 on staff full time, and because of the way the hiring and retiring and training and stuff, they don't actually ever have 177 at any point in time functioning. So the question is, and then the other piece of significant information is the statistics on crime in Nashua. So I had that binder. Police Chief Susing provided all the aldermen with a nice binder with 20, 30 pages of charts and graphs, which I love as an engineer. And I'm trying to find trends. I didn't really see a strong, compelling case for the fact that crime is getting that bad. If you looked at it, you could make an argument for it. There was enough data to support the fact that the crime.
But it was an early trend.
It was an early trend, and it's hard to associate causality. Is it because of we don't have enough police, or is it because of just bad economy? But okay, so we do have a spike in the crime. What do we do about it? One solution could be to apply more police in the locations where there's high crime, and so that's not resolved. That was not resolved in this year's budget because it's essentially approved as is with this the force they have.
And they're going to see how it works and do a little bit more studying, and whether they can, just by manipulating how they place the police to cover the more crime-prone areas.
Yes,
is that
possibly, and there's some more subtleties with the overtime. We did, even though the budget was sort of agreed upon for the police budget, there was an increase in a couple items versus last year, in particular the dispatchers. Now, how does the dispatchers affect crime? Well, because there weren't enough dispatchers, so regular duty police were working as dispatch.
I see.
And so with a little bit of money, you can hire in dispatchers and put the police back on the streets, and essentially you're paying a lower scale for the dispatchers for higher scale for police. And that's part of it. There was a suggestion to have a study. And now, how do you get it? I don't know where one finds a third party to come in and do a study and advise Nashua you need to hire or not hire more police. But at least the conversation has begun, and I think everybody would like to reduce crime.
Well, that's true, and it's always an easy thing to highlight, and the newspapers like to make, advantage of anything like that. I mean, they're playing up some of the things that are happening. They're giving them prominent space in the paper. You don't see some of the thought process or the analysis that goes into managing the city as much as you do all the problems that the city has. And it's a negative way, unfortunately, that I guess sells papers, or maybe not selling papers. I don't know, because the newspaper business isn't doing very well to this right now. And that's one of the reasons we've had this program here. We feel that we can do a little bit more of getting the people to see people like you that are in the city or the state legislature, and how they work at their job, how they approach the problems up there, because I think the papers don't go into it. They just highlight whatever controversial part of this issue is, rather than really getting into the meat of the issue. And hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that. Maybe you'd like to go into your Human Affairs Committee, which is the one of choice. Is that what the...
Yep, that was my top choice, Human Affairs. And part of the reason I chose that is to give, as an engineer, a machine, emotionless engineer that I am, it was an opportunity to give to the community and experience and explore the world of nonprofits and how they interact and what can we do for the city. And that's essentially what the Human Affairs Committee does. And I like the chairman. My good friend, my chief of staff, advised friends, and so I said, okay, I think I could work with this group, and it's been fun. There's the most significant part of that is the community development block grants that comes annually, and it's $500,000 essentially that we have money from the federal government block granted that the city of Nashua can accept or not,
and then dispense,
and then however we want, however we choose, within some guidelines. And by the way, if we do reject it and it goes back to the federal government, before I agreed, I learned that would not reduce anybody's taxes by turning it down. You always have to I always want to ask, if we say no, I don't want the money, is that going to reduce our taxes? And the reason it wouldn't is because it just goes back in the coffers and some other state will get it. First, it goes back to New Hampshire, and another city could have it. And if New Hampshire says no, then it goes back to another state. So the real way to reduce taxes is just somebody in Congress has to say, okay, no more block grants.
That's right. Well, not necessarily that, or that nobody gets it. If somebody rejects it, nobody else gets it, and goes back to the Treasury to reduce our debt. I think that federal poison, as I put it, misleads cities in doing things, or states in doing things that they really don't have to do or want to do in some cases. Yes,
and it gets complicated. Now I start to digress a bit, but the services are there. We need to have the services to some extent, and I also learned that if we it would just displace money. So if this particular block grant didn't exist, then the city might have to take up the slack somewhere else. Which, again, another thing I saw on the Human Affairs Committee, the mayor would like to start a program called the CHINS program, Children in Need of Services. That a lot of that funding was cut at the state level.
That's right.
And so the state budget, it helped balance at the state level, but now we have the services that we lost in Nashua, and the city of Nashua, we would like to pick up as much as we can. And so the sort of the tax money just moved a little bit. But within this, the CDBG, let's talk happy stuff.
Okay.
There was one day when about, must have been 20 of the representatives of the nonprofits in Nashua that made the applications came through and had 10 to 15 minutes each to present their case. And the nice thing about the committees, there's only 5 of us, since there's a lot of empty chairs in the horseshoe, which means when you come to speak, you get to sit down in a chair in the horseshoe, and so it makes it a lot more intimate. And so where my chair is, I'm near the aisle. And Alderman Doncha sits at my right, and he's not on that committee. So that meant a lot of the people that came in and spoke happened to sit next to me. So it was a nice chance to just get up front and meet them a little more personally. And you could see the nervousness on some of them who are just, they're here to give the talk, and they want to really do a good job. But you could tell it's like they're not used to talking in public. So we do our best to get them to relax. But that was nice to meet them. And then we spent an entire day going around the city, meeting each of the nonprofits and getting a tour.
There's a lot of them in the city, isn't there?
There are, and I had no idea how many there were.
I went to one of the general meetings once, and just surprised to see how there were 50 people at the meeting, and I learned that there's like over 100 different NCOs.
Yeah. And then there's various gradations, I guess. There's a fully nonprofit. There's some that partially profit, like there's a apartment building that has low-income housing and various things. So then it was tough to actually decide who didn't get money. So we did our best to uniformly reduce everybody's amount to try and make sure that everybody got something, because the amount of funds was less than the...
Tell me, when you look at that, do you look at all the structure of the different organization and how much money they get outside? Because the county, I'm also chair of the executive committee for the county, so we reviewed the budgets there. And one of the questions that came up is that some of these officers get quite a good salary, and they get very little from fundraisers that they do themselves. They depend on either the city or the county or the state granting them some money. And I was just wondering whether you looked at it from that perspective.
We did. The application process, there was at least 4 or 5 pages and a lot of charts and tables and numbers and background that spelled all that out. You wanted to make sure there was a healthy organization, so there's some history to it, so you knew that they have funds on their own. And also, the people tend to, they sort of self-select, I guess. They tend not to apply every single year to this funding. In fact, some people will come up and say, we got a grant several years ago, we haven't applied in a couple of years, can you please consider us? So there was some of that, for sure. And then there were a couple where they appeared to have enough outside funds and that it wasn't necessary to supplement it.
Okay, good.
But it's also the diversity, of the range of the requests. There was one request for whatever, like $100,000, and another request for $7,000.
Yeah.
It is. Some people, all they want is the door fixed.
Well, yeah, that's true. The other question I had about these organizations is that, does anybody ever suggest that some of them get together and merge and cover, because I think with so many things there, it's hard for you to decide which one's the best, and they could put together better programs if they merged to some extent. But that's a question that I've had that nobody's been able to answer for me anyway.
Probably Alderman Lori Wilshire might know more about that, because she actually does that for a living. But that does segue a little bit into more of the Human Affairs Committee, the Review and Comment Commission. That's one of the things that they did to make sure there wasn't redundancy within the city. Is this, somebody asked for money, is the service already provided elsewhere? If it is, then no, we won't give you that funding. And so that would sort of force them financially to either go out or work together.
Okay. Well, we're sort of winding up our time period here. I just wanted to touch on this electioneering thing that you were telling me about. Go ahead, tell me.
Certainly. So this past the presidential primary election, there was an issue in Ward 9, which it may have happened in several other wards, where there was an organization that was there causing some ruckus accidentally. So the rules state that you are not supposed to be within 100 feet of the door to the polls on election day. And here was this organization, this political organization, that had a table set up just right outside the door. And so some of the people at that, I wasn't campaigning, so I wasn't restricted, but there were several people that were standing, holding their signs outside the 100 feet, saying, "How come we're out here and they're up there?" And so I called around. I called the city clerk, Paul Bergeron, and talked to him, and he checked into it and got back to us. And the official ruling was the restriction only applies if you're electioneering or campaigning for something on that particular ballot. Either you are running for office, you're helping someone run for office, but this particular group of people was campaigning for an issue not on that ballot. They wanted to get on the general election ballot, so the restriction didn't apply.
I didn't hear about that. That didn't get a good play in the newspapers.
It didn't, apparently. And so so I thought, okay, this should be easy to clear up. So the first thing I decided to do was find out, does the city of Nashua have the authority to regulate such matters? And how would we write an ordinance to just make it clear that I don't care who you are or what you're doing, you've got to be 100 feet outside that boundary if you want to do anything. And so I spent some time with the city attorney, and we found out that yes, indeed, the Nashua does have the authority. And also, as I was passing the time one day, I discovered that there's already an ordinance that says exactly that.
Oh.
It says no handbills of any type. But it turns out that also has the accidental problem of preventing people from selling Girl Scout cookies. And
that's right. They always have that. Yeah.
So this was the ordinance that I put in that is going to be up for. It got first reading. It was referred to committee this coming Monday. It'll be the the Personnel and Administration Committee. Personnel Administrative, committee on this coming Monday. So I worked with Paul Bergeron, and we added a few things in there. He actually decided to add a couple things about cars and parking within the 100 feet, and what you can put on the cars, and just to make it black and white, because part of the problem was it put the moderators at odds with these two groups. If there was a gray area, then they have to be the judge, and they're volunteers, and they don't
want to do that. Yeah,
and we don't want to. So let's just make their life easy, make it easier for everybody, make it black and white, and allow people to still sell the Girl Scout cookies. So that's what the ordinance is doing, but also the process of just getting the ordinance, getting the discussion, highlighted the issue, and so now Paul Bergeron can disseminate that information to all the moderators that all know the rules. So this coming elections,
so that's the only change, though?
Any electioneering of any type for any ballot, past, present, or future, doesn't matter, 100 feet away from the polls.
They're not going to allow cars with signs on them in the parking lot?
Within 100 feet.
Well, okay, because they were chasing the cars with signs on them that were 500 feet away.
Right. I have to go check the order, that part, that poll. I believe you're correct that if you have a car with a sign on it parked in that public parking lot, you're not allowed to park there. You have to go somewhere outside.
The moderator was doing that in Ward 1, and I think they had a reasonable understanding. I mean, you know, at one time you're supposed to hold on to your sign. And if you put it on the ground, they say, oh, no, you can't do that. But, you know, she used to say, well, all right, just hold on, touch it or something, you know. But she was reasonable about that. And it's easier in that in Ward 1 to mark off 100 feet. But it's
Yeah.
not always easy in some of those wards.
Yeah, 9, it's easy. I hear in Ward 7, it's tough.
Yeah.
Because the way the parking lot
That's right.
curls around.
And I think Ward either 2 or 3 is also has a problem.
Yeah.
So anyway, but we're reached the end of our little
Okay.
conversation.
Oh, well, so much more to say.
I appreciate your time and I appreciate your answers. And we welcome the listeners to contact the Nashua Republican City Committee. Their website is nashuagop.org. It lists all the events that we have, and something is coming up in August is our stakeout. We'll have a national figure as a key speaker, and the meetings are on Thursday, the second Thursday of every month at 6:30 at the Crown Plaza. So please tune us in and listen to look at our website and become active. This is your community. And this is Representative Carl Seidel signing off with our guest, Dan Moriarty. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay.